Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Hello, Patrick Donoghue here, news editor with the Irish Farmers Journal. The Balmoral Show is in full swing. Exhibitors and visitors from Northern Ireland and beyond enjoy the fine weather on the first day of the show. My colleague Anthony Jordan takes us to some of the most popular tents and rings to meet show-goers and exhibitors.
I'm here with John Henning from Armagh, who's here with his Angus bull. John, tell us about this animal.
This is an animal that we bred. He's 7-year-old. We bought his mother in Scotland as a yearling heifer, and she bred very well for us. She's bred a number of breed and interbreed champions. This bull has been to Balmoral. Probably this will be his 5th or 6th show. He was reserve male champion at the Balmoral Show in 2015. He has won interbreed titles at Armagh and featured in interbreed competitions at some other shows as well. So he is doing particularly well for us. We run a small herd on a part-time basis, and unfortunately the herd is quite closely related, so we can't use him as much as we maybe would like, because he's related to so many of the cows in the herd. So he's for sale.
In terms of the Balmoral Show, you mentioned him in here a few years. How long have you been coming to the show?
This is our 23rd Balmoral Show.
Your 23rd?
Yeah.
And how do you find it? How has it improved over the years?
Well, certainly from the Angus breed point of view, the numbers forward have increased quite significantly as new people get involved in the breed. But we find that with most pedigree, I think pedigree beef breeds, and maybe in the sheep as well, a lot of people come into the breed and they think it's a get-rich-quick scheme. It's not. So they come and go. So we have stuck with them, and it's good to see the popularity of the breed coming back. Probably 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was maybe difficult to sell bulls. In 2015, we sold all our bulls at home to repeat customers, including one customer who had taken his 5th bull from us over the number of years. So it's good to see people who have stuck with the breed being rewarded, because in the modern beef industry, increasingly people are seeing the importance of economics rather than these fancy animals that require a lot of feeding. Angus can fit into an awful lot of systems, and very popular at the minute and over the last year or so for dairy farmers to add a bit of additional income to replace less for their milk, because the Angus cross calf versus a Holstein bull calf, there's quite a difference in the bottom line what it can contribute.
John Henning, thank you very much. I'm still here in the cattle tent, where I'm here with James Boyd, who is breeding Dexter cattle. James, talk to me about your Dexter bull here.
This is a Dexter bull that was born in June last year. He's still just a young bull, and he's a short-legged Dexter, so he's good width and he's good length and he's good carcass. So yeah, well, whatever happens at the show.
Talk to me about the Balmoral Show. How long have you been coming to the show?
This is the second time I've only been at the show. Sometimes with exams and stuff, it's quite hard to get out of the show, but no, it's good. It's good experience and all to get the animals out, and to set a name for yourself for when you're breeding animals and selling them on in the future.
And how long have you been interested in Dexter cattle for?
I've had Dexter cattle since 2012. So I have, and it's really since that I've been trying to build my herd and try and breed the best, I suppose.
James, thank you very much.
No problem.
I'm here with Roberta Mathers in the Women's Institute tent, and I'm feeling very, very hungry. Roberta, tell me why.
Because you're standing looking at lovely cakes that have been decorated, nice potato bread that would be lovely for your breakfast, and very nice biscuits over at the other end.
And what would happen if I started picking at them here? Would you be angry?
I would be very cross. Slapped wrist would be the happening.
And you're here to guard them, are you?
I'm guarding them, yes, from people like you.
Very good. How long have you come to the Balmoral Show for?
For as long as I can remember.
And how has it changed over the years?
Well, it has changed. Obviously, the venue has changed and it's become much bigger, and a lot more people would be coming to it. So it's very good this year, particularly when we've got the nice weather.
Robert, thank you very much.
That's grand. Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thanks a
Okay.
million. The blade shearing is just concluded. I'm here with Sam McConnell, the winner of the Blade Shearing Open. Is that correct, Sam?
Yep, that's right.
How's the arm?
It's a bit stiff for us. I'll be able to let on.
3 sheep sheared in just over 10 minutes. At what point does the arm start getting stiff?
A bit of practice, it shouldn't really get stiff, but it's only early in the season, so halfway through the second sheep, you're just wanting it to be over.
In terms of the rest of the season, how many more blade shears would you have to do?
There's another 3 or 4 now, and that's me qualified now to go and represent Northern Ireland in the World Championships in New Zealand in February. So the more practice I get in, the better February will be.
And when did his career begin?
As soon as I could walk. My granda had me helping him, and then my dad's a shearing contractor, so just followed him.
Brilliant. Sam, thank you very much. I'm here with Philip Sanahan from Drains Ice Cream. Philip, very, very welcome.
It was 1932, 80 years, just over 80 years now in business. So we started out, first 50 years was doorstep, okay, just local trade around Lisburn. Always milk from our own herd, always had the cows there on site. 30 years ago we sort of moved into more commercial premises, sort of local restaurants. That's developed now. We do this business such as like Merchant Hotel, Dean's, Shoe, Made in Belfast, Fitzgerald Hotel. A lot of high profile clientele right down to there's good, coffee shops, cafes and towns around the sort of greater Belfast area. We've always milked for our own herd. As the business has grew, we've had to supplement that milk with the local farmers that currently buy from Patrick at the Ballyversham, which now merged with Town of Monaghan. So again, it comes from local farms to us. Last year we developed into our own ice cream, which has been going phenomenally well, with over 50 restaurants in the greater Belfast area using it. We're now up to about 20 scooping cabinets like what we just had there, serve-overs. So the business is good. We're growing at a good rate. Like I say, everything's brought milk by ourselves, processed on site, pasteurised, put into the bottle or put into the ice cream, and then we do our own distribution as well. So we have a fleet of 15 trucks there.
And what made you get involved in ice cream? What was the kind of motivating moment?
I think just the customer base that we have in food service had mentioned it a number of times over the years. Like any dairy, milk is a struggle, and we were looking at something that was going to add a wee bit of value to the brand and the range. So it just seemed to be it. I mean, we just seemed to fall into it. I mean, it was some chefs just sort of point us in the right direction, and it was something that we always aspired to do. Where it was cheese, where it was butter, we just sort of felt there was a gap in the market for a premium ice cream.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Anthony also interviewed the new Tánaiste and Minister for Justice and Equality, Frances Fitzgerald, for Irish Country Living this week. He asked her about rural crime and the deployment of more Gardaí.
In terms of the new Garda numbers, obviously it's been well documented in the
Yes.
new draft proposals that it's up to 15,000. Where will this personnel be deployed around the country?
Well, that's an operational matter for the Garda Commissioner. Obviously, what she has to do is examine the needs of different areas. Because what we have at present, we have rates of crime going down in certain areas, going up in other areas. As I say, you get different periods of where you have different trends in crime. Now, the Garda Commissioner has to make a decision based on what the needs of a given area are. So far, people have been placed all over the country, urban and rural. Some areas are higher needs than other. And of course, the truth is that, the difficult economic situation we've been through and the austerity impacted. We must remember the Templemore was closed. There was very little investment in mobile vehicles and very little investment in Garda Síochána during a period. And when we came into government, we reopened Templemore. We now in the programme for government have said we want a Garda force of 15,000, so we will have some more accelerated recruitment, and then that begins to give the Garda Commissioner the opportunity to place people where they are most needed. There's also the issue of transfers for Gardaí, which is a big issue, and retirements of course, but people also want to be transferred, and they can't be transferred unless there's people to replace them.
Okay. And in terms of, say, obviously the big crime well documented in inner city Dublin at the moment,
Yes.
how will you strike the balance, or how difficult will it be to strike the balance of employing a higher Garda reserve in there as well as in rural Ireland?
Well, that's what the Garda Commissioner has to do, and we're building up the numbers of Gardaí now. She's a greater opportunity to do that than before. We have to continue it. It's not going to happen overnight. What you have to have as well, and the way modern policing works, is you have to have targeted operations where there's a particular problem. So if, for example, we're seeing a spate of rural crime, there's a whole lot of different things that we need to do to deal with that. You have to work with the farming organisations, and there's quite a number of initiatives in relation to that now with the Farmers Association. I've actually met with them myself last year. There's more that we can do to have communities working effectively with the Garda, the text alert. We've doubled the funding for all of those kind of initiatives now.
In terms of funding for maybe specified rural activities or communities that are fighting back against this kind of stuff, as in imposing their own CCTV?
Well, we certainly want, in the programme for government, we've committed to greater use of CCTV. I think it's really important, and I think in sort of hotspots we really need to be examining in villages and towns around the country where it isn't available. The Garda are doing a review of it at the moment, and I think we need increased funding for CCTV and a list of priorities to be agreed about where it should be installed. And that should be based on where Garda think it will be most effective and communities working together. We've seen some very interesting initiatives in Kilkenny, for example, between the business community and the Garda. And I think the future is, communities working effectively with local Garda, businesses, everybody working together to create safe communities, because that at the end of the day is the basic we all want, is safe communities.
And in terms of the draft proposal, we talked about the 6 pilot stations that are reopening.
Yes.
What is the protocol? What is the benchmark that if they do well, does that mean that more Garda stations will reopen?
The Garda Inspector's report has said that on Garda Síochána should be allocated in areas where the need is shown to exist. So it should be based on objective criteria. Now, there's a very important sense of security that people feel around Garda stations, but what we really want to see is community policing. We don't necessarily want to see people in buildings. You want to see people in communities. Quite apart from whether there's a Garda station or not, we need a greater priority being given to having community policing and police being available, Garda being available to the local community. So that's the focus. It's a priority, one of the top priorities in the Garda strategy plan for this year. So a lot of work is going to be done to ensure there's more community police available around the country. That means, of course, the recruitment continuing in Templemore and a priority being given to that kind of work. The question of the Garda stations, in the programme for government, we've asked the group that will be reviewing this issue to look at the crime rates, to look at what they think would be the most effective way to combat the type of crime in the area. So it shouldn't just be about geography, it has to be about the effective deployment of Garda around the country. And you have to look at the crime rates, you have to look at how close is a Garda station to serving that community, what are the numbers available. There's a lot to be taken into account. It would be completely objective.
And I suppose in terms of how unpopular closing Garda stations were back in 2012 and 13, is that a regret of yours that they did close?
Well, at the time there was an operational decision taken. The country was going through an extremely difficult period. The Garda Commissioner of the day recommended a rationalisation. There were many Garda stations that were only open for an hour or two, and really that didn't serve anybody very well. A lot of Garda are also involved in work that many people feel could equally be done, by civilians. And, some of the work in Royal Garda stations was that type of work. So those kind of services. So it may be that, they could be provided elsewhere. So you have to look at all of these issues together.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Meanwhile, the Brexit referendum campaign is continuing in the UK. European Commissioner for Agriculture Phil Hogan was in Belfast on Monday to deliver the annual Gibson lecture at Queens University, and he painted a bleak picture of what would happen to Ireland if the UK leaves the EU.
The annual payments from the European Union account for 87% of annual farming, compared to 53% in the UK as a whole. In other words, for every £10 sterling that Northern Irish farmers earn, the CAP accounts for £8.70 of that total. Were it not for European assistance, many farmers would not alone generate significant losses, but would struggle to survive. Farmers in Northern Ireland have the opportunity to capitalise on over 53 free trade agreements, which allow for agri-products to be exported and imported without any red tape. And as part of our ongoing negotiations, we aim to establish new trading agreements which would enable all of our member states to extend their sales to other Asian markets in particular. The new trade deal between Northern Ireland and China in the pig meat sector, over 12,000 tonnes of pig meat will be shipped each year to the east without having to deal with high tariffs or tiresome regulatory frameworks. I expect that we'll have a free trade agreement within the next year with Japan, which will be very important for dairy products and for pig meat. The reality is that all this has come about because of the size and strength of the European Union of 500 million people. I have no need to tell this audience how many people live and work on either side of the border. who cross daily while working in essentially the same communal space, carrying both euros and pounds, the European Union and the UK in their pockets. We owe it to our fellow citizens, both British and Irish, to ask, how will this movement of people, goods, services and capital be affected in the event of a Brexit? And we need to be able to answer that question to ourselves and our families honestly. If any form of land border is to be reintroduced, how will this disrupt the substantial cross-border trade in agri-food products? There is a constant daily movement of live animals for fattening, of dairy products, to name just two elements of our trading relationship. Will Irish farmers lose tariff-free access to the UK market and vice versa? We must remember that there were quite substantial monetary correction mechanisms in the 1970s. And how will this impact on cross-border smuggling and illegal trade? There will be clear incentives to recreate the old channels of smuggling, which I looked across today from where I was in Warren Point. The relationship between people living and businesses operating either side of the border is one of neighbourliness. Some of them get on better than others. And I believe it would be a retrograde step if that relationship was compromised by potential tariffs, by tailbacks, and by other trade blockages that an external border and international European border would entail.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
There's been much attention given to solutions to manage milk price volatility in recent days. One of the discussions took place at the conference organised by the Ulster Farmers Union and Dairy UK in Lisburn last week. There, the Irish Farmers Journal's Northern Ireland editor David Wright met Jay Waldvogel from the leading US co-op Dairy Farmers of America.
Jay Waldvogel look after strategy and international development for Dairy Farmers of America, DFA. We're the largest dairy cooperative in the U.S. Currently have about 9,000 farm members. Total, we market nearly 30 billion litres of milk a year and operate across the value chain in the U.S., everything from basic milk to producing basic commodities to some of the best-known regional brands for dairy products across to the country.
In terms of the market and the situation in the States currently, we're obviously in Europe under a lot of pressure at this point in time. How are dairy farmers getting through 2016 and how optimistic are they about the next 6 to 12 months?
So the pain that dairy farmers around the world are feeling, certainly here in Europe, and you hear it as well down in Oceania, isn't being felt nearly as strongly in the US right now. Part of that is the strength of a large domestic market, so we do have some pretty good news around consumption of cheese and as many places in the world butter, and that's really holding our milk price up a little bit better than maybe what you're seeing here in Europe and certainly what you're seeing in Oceania. That said, it is difficult right now and there is quite a bit of concern looking ahead. I don't think it's a matter of farmers seeing the next year as being necessarily more difficult than right now, but they certainly don't see any real improvement going ahead. So it's challenging, but certainly not as dire as it is here right now.
We heard a bit about the margin protection program in the States, really only starting to kick in 2015. What's your thoughts in terms of what impact that will have in terms of volatility and flattening out the price profile?
The margin protection program in the U.S. is really a disaster insurance program. So by itself, that program doesn't stimulate anyone to grow. It doesn't really stimulate people other than it helps them in times of real disaster and keeps them from kind of having to be pushed out of the business. The one thing that came with it in the Farm Bill, though, that people don't recognize so much is that when the margin protection program was put in, at the same time the government removed the CCC purchase program where they used to physically come in and buy product like milk powder when the prices were low. That actually helped reduce volatility because it used the balance sheet of the U.S. to hold inventories that didn't then hit the world market. That's gone now, and so what that means is everything we produce does get sold, and so we are in fact more actively selling on the world market, and that in some way does contribute to volatility. It helps push the bottom of the market price a little bit lower.
And Dairy Farmers of America, aside from the margin protection program, you have your own tools in place to help people through volatile prices?
Yeah, so DFA has a long-standing risk management program in place, and we offer a wide range of risk management tools, whether it be fixing longer-term milk prices, looking at bands that can give you a maximum minimum milk price. We even have tools that are much more complex in terms of helping farmers fix their margins, so not only the milk price but also the cost of their inputs and feed. And we've been offering that for a number of years, and right now, we get a significant volume of our member milk is actually hedged forward in some way, shape, or form, so our farmers do have some way to manage through that volatility.
And do you see that as maybe a model that we should be looking at here in Ireland? I know some of our companies really are looking at it, particularly in the Republic of Ireland, but is that the way forward rather than thinking necessarily about a hedging or margin protections, whatever? It's more about thinking about how you can hedge feed prices, fertilizer prices, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, well, I'm a firm believer that milk is a commodity, is going to stay a commodity, and that means there's going to be volatility. Hopefully not as extreme as we've seen over the last several years, but volatility is a fact of life in our industry, and certainly more so here now in Europe and Ireland as you've taken the quota away. So what you want to look for is tools that help you manage that. Don't assume you can make it go away, but give farmers and processors access to tools where you're trading off some of the highs and lows for a little bit more predictability.
Previous speakers talked about that farmers need to cut production, and until they cut production we won't necessarily see an upswing in prices. You're quite realistic about how that maybe might actually work in practice, in that it's a very slow process of telling a farmer to cut production. It can't happen overnight.
It's proven almost around the world. Farmers tend to think quite a bit the same, and if you oversimplify it, when prices are low, you tend to produce as much milk as you possibly can to generate the cash to cover your cost. When prices are high, you produce as much milk as you can because you're generating a lot of cash and you want to take a benefit of that. And in the middle, farmers like to make milk, and they just tend to keep making milk. It's what they're very, very good at. And so when you try to tell them, here's a signal to have you slow down, those signals usually take a long time to get through. Unfortunately, they only really get through when there's a lot of pain being felt. And so they're very blunt instruments to try and get people to move away from. So unless you look at a really long-term program to help them understand what's the best option long-term and then slowly evolve there's very few things you can do, I really think, to modify production in the short term.
And finally, you talked a little bit about how maybe some of the co-ops and some of processors are trying to have dipped into the balance sheets to try and keep prices up, and also we've bit of intervention product in Europe. You've raised a few issues there that maybe that can actually dampen the signals that go to producers.
Indeed. So if you see now that the prices have gone quite low on the back of demand issues, whether it's Russia being shut out or the Chinese slowing down, coupled with the increased milk production that's come particularly out of Europe, not exclusively, particularly out of Europe post-quota. If you're not telling farmers what the real value of that marginal milk is, what's the real value of the extra drop of milk you're producing, and you're muting it, whether it's Fonterra giving interest-free loans, Murray Goulburn announcing they're going to keep the price up and spread out over 3 years, or cooperatives in Europe maybe in some cases actually using their balance sheets to pay a little bit more for milk, you're simply not giving farmers the information they need to make the right decisions. It doesn't help you in the short term because they're not correcting supply like maybe they would if they had a sharp signal. And it's not helping in the long term because you're giving everybody, whether it's processors or farmers, a signal that you will find ways to keep them making more milk. That's not how economics works in its best sense.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.
Another challenge to manage for farmers is antimicrobial resistance, and the reality that we won't be able to use antibiotics as freely in the future. My colleague Odile Evans talked to dairy farmer and chairman of Animal Health Ireland, Mike McGann, about the trial he ran on his own farm in County Longford using less antibiotics to dry off cows.
Yeah, we've been concerned for quite some time back with regard to dry cow therapy and the use of dry cow tubes at drying off time. Are they all needed? So about 3 years ago, we looked in conjunction with Animal Health Ireland and the advice that was coming from them and from other countries as to whether we could just treat with teat seal cows that had low SCC and just do the normal dry cow antibiotic and teat seal on cows that had higher SCC. So using the milk recording data that we had, the last milk recording before drying off time, at that year we did all cows that were over 150,000 with dry cow therapy and teat seal. And then we watched the next season when they calved, was there any new instance of mastitis. There did not appear to be any new instance of mastitis, and SCC did not go up. So the following year we did cows from 200,000. We put the threshold higher because that actually, as we found out subsequently, that's the threshold for a lot of the milk purchasers in the UK, that you're not allowed to use dry cow therapy on cows that unless they have a serious problem. So we're 3 years into the trial. For the third year we stayed on the same level, the 200,000. So there's cows now in their fourth lactation. They were heifers the first year, and now they're in fourth lactation, who's never got a dry cow tube, who's never got an antibiotic tube, and absolutely zero increase in cases of mastitis. So the benefits are you're introducing less antibiotics into unnecessary antibiotics. There's a lower cost. And really one of the big issues when cows calve is the need to withdraw the milk for the appropriate length of time because of the dry cow therapy. And you've avoided all of that worry. So you now only need 3 or 4 milkings, maybe 5 or 6 if you want to be really careful on the colostrum into the tank type thing. But you don't have the antibiotic concern as well. The withdrawal period disappears.
But have you had to adopt any other practices on your farm, such as, I don't know, teat spraying or more liming of cubicles?
Yeah, well, it sort of goes in hand with other things being good. As you said, liming cubicles, we've probably got more vigilant about cleaning cubicles and liming the cubicles. But the most important thing is, at drying off time, we're meticulous about cleaning the teat. Using swabs, using medicated wipes to make sure the teat is clean, because the only place you can introduce the problem to have your mouth is up to the teat orifice. And if you're anyway dirty or anyway sloppy about that, you're going to introduce a problem. So we're really meticulous about that. We don't do any more than 10 or 15 at any one time. Is it working? Yes. We've no ill effects. I certainly would like Teagasc to trial it to get. I know they have been doing it, and we'd like the results of that to come out, because there's no point in me as a farmer telling others who've been doing something in a particular way for years change their practice, because if anything goes wrong, well, who am I to have told them? But I'm telling my fellow farmers that as a farmer we've been doing this and it's working on our farm. So you have lower cost, less worry, and you're not creating an issue around antimicrobial resistance, which is going to become a serious issue, I believe.
Yeah, because I mean that's something that's coming up at European level now among elected representatives there, and like the next thing is there's going to be a vote on the prophylactic use of antibiotics in agriculture. So I mean there is a struggle there maybe to understand why you would put antibiotics into a cow that you're drying off, and what you're saying is basically that it can work.
Oh, it absolutely can work, and I think you may actually get better results. I don't have enough of the science behind it, but if you subsequently do get a problem, well, maybe the treatment will be even better because that cow hasn't been exposed to antibiotics at all. Yeah, I think in a time where we're looking at cost and we're looking at being responsible as milk producers or as food producers, prophylactic use of any antibiotic has to be challenged, and I think what you're saying is right. It's going to come under threat from Europe, and we are far better as an industry to have tackled this and to have shown our responsibility and how responsible we are in advance of something coming down the line where you're actually told, well, you can't do certain things.
And just to pick up on what you said about cost, do you have any idea how much Irish farmers spend on antibiotics in a year, or how much this could save?
75% of the cows of the country, by the stats that I've seen with regard to the purchase of dry cow therapy, about 75% of the cows of the country get an antibiotic treatment, a dry cow treatment. But there is evidence that there's at least some people considering looking at change. And as I said earlier, I certainly would encourage them to do it. I'm not telling them to do and go and change, because too many people know where I live. but have a think, and don't be afraid, because I think it can work. And do it on 10% of your cows the first year. Just try it. Yeah. All your low SEC cows say, right, I'm only going to them teat seal. Your second and third calvers, they're low SEC. Right, and then you'll grow to the confidence in 2 or 3 years to actually only use it on the cows that really need it.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Finally, let's take stock on the past winter's flooding and the works needed to stop history from repeating itself in the future. There was a meeting of all state agencies sharing the management of the River Shannon last week, and O'Deill Evans met the head of the body in charge of leading the process, OPW Chair Claire McGrath.
If you were given a blank cheque in the morning, what would you do to sort out flooding?
What I'm going to tell you in answer to that is I have been given a cheque for 430 million to 2021.
Okay.
And in the giving of that, government has said to the OPW, you are developing a programme to manage flood risk in the country. Yeah. You've focused in on 300 areas. There are 66 of those on the Shannon. Here we're putting you in funds to bring those forward. So even in anticipation of the completion of the plans, they're telling us be ready now for getting into the ground 2017, 18, 19. So it's going to rise from where we're at the moment in around 45 million a year up to running at 100 million within a number of years. That's my check.
Okay, so you have a check. Yeah. Do you think, in your own opinion, has the OPW failed to manage the risk of flooding in the past? In your opinion?
No, because the risk of flooding is a natural. I mean, we're all of us as a country are living with the risk of flooding. It is about managing under a number of strands as to how we deal with that. So we have started in 2009 the planning guidelines, so we don't build where there are floodplains collectively. We're also looking at where communities are, and this is what we have done through not having a reactive, there's been a flood, let's go and deal with that. Yeah. We stopped and said, how can we as a policy develop a national flood risk plan that deals with this in a strategic, systematic way? And the fruition of that is when we publish the plans mid-year.
Okay, coming out of your meeting with the IFA today, I mean, our readers are farmers. What do you want to tell them?
I think what I would say to the farming community is we recognise the impacts that flooding has on various sectors and levels of society, and we're looking to manage through those impacts. For the moment, we are prioritising that around communities. But where communities interlink with farming and there is a benefit to the scheme in including that would form part of our consideration of doing the works. We are looking, there's an element where from the CFRAM people are seeing it in terms of there will be work, so physically somebody will be in the ground, as was said, with the digger. But what we're looking as well as the structural works, and we've already mentioned planning and the guidelines around planning. We're also mentioning flood forecasting, because there's a lot to be said. If I can be warned something is happening, I can move my animals, I can, if I'm given sufficient time. And government at the beginning of the year approved the putting in place of a flood forecasting system. It is going to take a number of years to develop. It is not an overnight. But in relation to how we can best support people as well, and looking at insurance and the getting of insurance. And we give to the insurance industry information on all schemes that we develop. And so what we're looking for is the penetration of that then into the policies. In fairness, the insurance industry who have reported to the Taoiseach on this are saying that of the level of properties that have insurance, 98% of them have flood cover. But what we're not clear on is what level that cover is set at. And so in this instance, the sectoral lead is the Department of Finance. So it is looking at this whole area of insurance. We're also looking at, and you may find that this will be the case, because obviously for farmers it attaches to a farmhouse. So we are looking at individual house protection in those locations where it may not be feasible to put in, because it's a community-led scheme and the viability around that. So where we can't, there's not a scheme, but is there some individual house protection? So we will be identifying from the CFRAM places of such that might arise. We have to identify and give options to government as to how you might give effect to such a scheme. Grant, tax, what, how, who. So that all has to be teased through, and we'll be reporting that to mid-year. And there are instances where it might be, in an extreme, a voluntary home relocation, which is not as straightforward in the case of farming, but that might be. So that's one of the things on the interagency. And we're also looking at land use. So that's being led by our colleagues in the Department of Agriculture and Forestation.
Land use as in relocating, or land uses?
Well, I think we would start saying land use that could have a benefit to the impact of flooding. So partly looking at forestation. So, but also there may be other matters that will arise.
Will the work of Bord na Móna on this as well come in there?
Yeah. Yes. Because Bord na Móna is part of our group as well, so whatever is, but what we'll be looking at is the sectoral lead on this to be the Department of Agriculture.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie, on the Irish Farmers Journal app and on iTunes every Thursday, brought to you by Ornua, the home of Irish dairy.